Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications, a podcast by MedComms experts. We share medical communications insights and advice from the best and brightest in the industry to find out what they're doing to push our industry forward. Here's your host, Wesley Portegies.
So Simon, what was your really defining moment when you realized you wanted to fight for a more collaborative and local or affiliate first approach?
So to start, I would first say that we aim today to have this collaborative approach, but I think that we're not there yet. And I would like to say that we will never be there yet. For me, it's more an everlasting process where every year we need to build on the previous years and to add to it. So back to your question of a defining moment, I would like to take the example of the year-end assessment of activities. Every year, we look at the metrics. We try to understand what worked and what didn't work. We also try to align with the KPIs we set at the beginning of the year. So if I take a concrete example, a couple of years back, we were doing this exercise of assessing our activities. And at that moment, we were very surprised of what we found, meaning that we were sure the resources, the medical education resources created during the year were going to perform, that they were going to find their audience because we thought that we had a need to provide it. But when we looked at the metrics, well, they were simply not used in the field. So that was very complicated for us at Global to try to understand why. And I think that can speak to a lot of our listeners today, the fact to invest a lot of time, to invest a lot of resources into the creation of an activity or a specific format, and to see that at the end, the people that are supposed to use it do not use it. So I think that today, this would be the defining moment that I would like to highlight, because that was really the trigger that led to a different approach in terms of medical education and medical communication, but also opened the door, I think, to this everlasting process. Because without this defining moment, we wouldn't have today the discussions, the processes, as well as the view of the field.
How does this work in your organization currently? And what are the things you feel work well about it? And what are some things where you are aiming to improve?
So I think in terms of medical communication and in a company, I would say even communication, not only medical, there is a tsunami of information. Everybody is receiving information from everyone. It is sometimes classified, most of the times not. So here, maybe I would like to say less is more. Maybe try to be consistent in your messaging, but do not send everything to everyone. You really need to narrow down the audience. It is very easy to send out an email to thousands of people, but if only 10, even less, 5 to 10% really have a need for that information, why send it to everyone? I mean, there is really a need to narrow down the scope of medical communication to the correct audience.
So how I'm trying to get more specific on do that. So what are some channels that you're using that you feel work well for those communications, and how do you know?
So today, to make sure that the correct audience has the correct message, we use various channels. Of course, we use email. It is very easy to send an email. We just need to make sure we send it to the correct person. So for that, we are working constantly on identifying that audience. And to identify that audience, it really comes back to the first moment of the creation of a resource during the need. We really, at that moment, try to specify the internal audience that will need that resource once it's available. We also try to have a lot of discussions with our colleagues using the materials, not only for feedback, but also to let them know what is available. That can be through forums that we host via Teams, for example, where everybody has an open mic to ask questions. We also send out some, we could say, quarterly or half-year newsletter, regrouping all of the information in one simple newsletter. The why we use different channels is because we know we are all different and that everybody needs his own or her own way of receiving the information. So by multiplying this information, we try to send to make sure that everybody has it. But we are also having a less is more approach where we do not want to send everything to everyone because it is simply too much.
Hey, Kimberly, so, in my discussions with many medical affairs leaders, I kind of feel that many of them still see social media as risky or out of reach. Sometimes, of course, the compliance hurdle coming up quickly and maybe not trying to, break through that boundary.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering what inspired you to champion this space so boldly and what made it personal or pertinent for you?
I think for us, it was really driven because we saw our, stakeholder mix, our, nephrologists and other nephrology HCPs, we saw them operating in space. And so, it led to us really investigating, well, what's happening in the space and why are they there and what are they doing there? What type of information, right, are they receiving or sharing and what's the intent behind it? And so that really opened our eyes to the opportunity, right? But like many people, right, it almost seemed like too big to tackle, right? Like social media, there are so many, regulations and we can't just jump in and, not have a fully fleshed out plan. But what really convinced us that we needed to do this is we saw misinformation in the space, right? We saw, people weren't doing it on purpose, but there was just misinterpretation of data, from studies or, from the literature. And we say, wow, social media is great, but with the volume of information and at the pace, misinformation is actually a big piece of it. And we felt like, as a medical affairs organization, we had, a responsibility actually to see if we could help provide, more credible, scientific information for folks.
Wow, that's interesting. I never expected that answer actually. And so what you're saying is if you don't communicate on social media as medical affairs, you risk that other people are going to do so on your behalf in a way, but not necessarily correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That, folks are out there talking about it. So whether or not you're there or not, they're talking about, right, the data and the disease state and everything because it's a public forum and it's available. And, we really saw two aspects that were important. One, we felt like we could contribute to the conversation, right, in a very peer, right, credible way, very much the way that we engage with, stakeholders in the field or, at congresses. But we also saw that in some cases, some voices were greater than others. And there was an opportunity to ensure they had the very best and, most recent information so that they were sharing credible information. Because no one, intends to get on there and misrepresent something, right? Often they're just not aware that there's additional data or, information to share. And that can be a little bit of a stumbling block because in medical affairs, we want every decision to be rooted in, a sound data and you have a whole process. But I feel like with digital overall, a lot of it is trial and error. And it's really a mindset of, let's assume a little bit of risk. Let's try this, even if it's a pilot, right? And then see where we land because it's so easy to pivot in the digital space, right? And so I actually see the risk of failure to be very small, right? Because I felt like you just pivot and adapt.
What would be the ideal constellation of social media networks? And maybe not particular for your organization, right? But in general, for a medical affairs organization, how would you feel the matrix of platforms should look like?
You know what? I think that's a great question. What is the ideal mix? And I don't think there's one answer that works for everyone. I don't feel like there's a set of these three and everybody has to be right in this one space. I think you have to consider your goals, the goals of your organization. What are you hoping to achieve? Why are you moving into the space? right? Because for some, it might simply be, there's a deficit of disease state information, right? And so you want to move into the space as a resource. For other groups, it might be, there's, you see that, physicians and other HCPs have a lack of understanding around your data, right? And so you're going with a very specific reason that, you want to share more specific information related to your studies and your outcomes, right? I think that dictates somewhat where you want to go, because it also dictates where you'll find your stakeholders. For some medical affairs organizations, they are, they have physician groups, they have allied health groups, and they even have patients, right, that they're interacting with. For other groups, it is strictly an HCP audience, because we know, based on the platform, sometimes you find them to be more, HCP oriented versus patient oriented. And so I would say, consider your stakeholder, and then just consider the format for your content, and that will help you decide your mix. So, for me, right, my vision would be to have a presence on some of the, what I call more traditional channels, where you're putting out, more kind of short snippets of, text-based information with maybe some graphics or some links. But then you also have what I feel like is sort of next level platforms that we're seeing, where there's a lot of content in video format, right? Versus short, pithy, videos, and then some longer form videos. I feel like that is where the space is evolving. And I feel like you'll catch most of your stakeholder mix if you have a presence, right, across both of those.
I think a scientific communications platform is, I guess, the typical project where it becomes really clear how hard it is to actually align the different teams internally. So how have you experienced that? What are some challenges you have seen when developing an SCP in terms of alignment?
Yeah, so I think in terms of developing a scientific communication platform, I think when you're kicking off to develop it, I think you really need buy-in early from the different functions. Also, I think you need to be clear from the offset what exactly this is. I think there's a lot of confusion. It's not I think the name SciComm's platform, it's not immediately obvious what it is. So it's really working early with the different functions to establish exactly what this is and exactly what the value is. And not only the value in terms of communicating with HCPs, but also the value beyond that and how the other functions can really build on this.
That's a really good point, actually. So in MedComms, we all know what an SCP is, but maybe outside, they might not be so familiar with the term. And I actually do remember speaking to someone about an SCP, and it's like, what is an SCP? As well, scientific communications platform. So, a website. It's like, no. So you're right. Like, I think we should clarify that. So maybe for anyone on this particular episode that doesn't know what an SCP exactly is, what would you say is a good description?
So the SciComm's platform. So I think the term platform, firstly, is misleading. So it's not a digital platform; it's actually a document. So it's owned by Medical Communications. I would say it's a foundational document. It's just strategic document, and it's really core to our comms strategy. So the SciComm's platform contains our scientific story. So it's really how we as a pharma company want to talk about our drug, and also the landscape, the disease landscape, the indication around the drug. It's a living document. So we update it regularly based on changes internally, so milestones, so new data, internal milestones, clinical milestones, and also externally, so what's happening in the external environment. I would say also that the SCP, it's data-driven, so it's fully referenced. So it's backed up by data. And within this as well, we can be aspirational. So it's quite important as well as, not only to look at what we can say now, but what we hope to say in the future. I would say as well, to go through what is a SciComms platform, I think the other thing as well is what it isn't. So I think there's often quite a lot of confusion that it's kind of an endless resource of maybe something like an encyclopedia. It definitely isn't that. So I think we need to be quite streamlined, that the content of our SciComms platform is really what we want to say around the drug. So it's not endless information where MSLs could actually comment on the statements to say, actually, are these being used in the external world? You know, am I using this with my HCP? So
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of maybe demonstrating the importance of SCPs, would you be able to have any example of kind of success story about an SCP, like where you really feel it influenced the way that the message was communicated to the outside world, or maybe actually to the internal team?
I think all of us as MedComms professionals, when we attend conferences, are always very eager and maybe a little bit nervous to hear how the external world is talking about our drug. And I've definitely had that experience of sitting in the audience of a congress and in the usual big plenary session on the clinical trial landscape. And I was working on a drug where it was quite early and we hadn't communicated a lot about it yet. And in these situations, either the drug would not be mentioned or it would be a short bullet on a slide about a competitor. And you should think, right, we need to do something here. And of course, we developed our SciComms platform and built on that in terms of making sure that those statements reach the outside world. So we published, etc. And then 2 years later, sat in the audience of the same conference. And again, you have that sinking feeling, oh gosh, how are they going to talk about our drug this time? And it was really beautiful to see that this time we had a separate slide and all the key differentiation points were on that slide. And it was beautifully presented by that key opinion leader. And I think really, we talk a lot about metrics in MedComms, and it's really difficult in medical affairs to actually, what is the impact of our work? But I think for me, in terms of MedComms, the impact is what's being said externally. Our scientific statements, are these being picked up? Are these being amplified externally? Are people talking about our drug, accurately? That's so important. And I think that really shows the impact, and that shows that what we're doing is actually pulling through.
Is MedComms evolving faster than your team can keep up? You're not alone, and you don't have to navigate it alone. Wesley Portegies, host of Transforming Medical Communications, is offering a limited number of free 30-minute consultancy sessions for medical affairs professionals. Whether it's medical communications, field medical, or medical affairs training, these sessions provide an opportunity to address your real-world challenges, pressure test ideas, and walk away with practical strategic insight for your team. No fluff, just strategy. Follow the on-screen link or in the show notes to book your free session now.
A good example of end-to-end use of insights. I was in a disease state area and we were just getting ready. We're putting out post-hocs of phase 2, just getting ready for launch. And the insights that were coming in, now this is a culmination of field medical insights plus social media listening, because we had a comprehensive report that reached us at Global, really highlighted that people were understanding our drug MOA, but in the context of all of our competitors that we are trying to differentiate from. And so what wasn't coming through was the unique, the uniqueness of the MOA and specifically what that meant to a clinical outcome. And that was apparent because you were getting the same, I'm worried about these class effects. I'm worried about these same things. I don't see a benefit over that. I would never use it. It was an oncology drug in a different area. I would never use it because of what I know about its toxicity. And all of our messaging was around the same but different. And the whole part of different was missing because they weren't being able to internalize what it meant clinically. It's not that they didn't understand or we weren't giving the message right. It's that we weren't connecting all of the dots the right way to have that impact to them that would change clinical practice. And so we were able to go back in and build more specific but general materials to better link those steps through that weren't being made in, the HCPs' minds on their own.
So that means that, when you use these insights, you use them also to, in the process of creating new content, correct?
Correct.
So how would you go about that? Like, for instance, and we might not be seeing that as an agency, right? So, but like, we build a lot of field decks, we build a lot of other materials, but I don't think I've ever gotten information from a client saying, hey, this we got from our field medical insights. Here's a report with some statements that we should make sure we consider. So perhaps that they worked that already into the briefing in another way. I don't know, of course. But I'm just wondering if this is like a usual procedure, or is this really something you're advocating for and that we should do more of?
So probably both. I think to some point they're picked up in broader IEGPs and things like that when you have these cross-functional planning meetings internally. So by the time it would reach you at the content agency, maybe it's, been worked out. But also, I think there's more of it that needs done on a specific level. And so what I mean towards that is we just presented data at a Congress, and our field team is presenting the oral data in the field. Now, this could be consolidated infographic. This could be the exact slides used. Hopefully, messaging was written and highlights were made so that they know the key points that the company wants through, that the messaging is clear. Sometimes it's done, sometimes it's not. Good point to optimize there to help your field teams out. But then what happens? So they have that conversation. They ask the doctor, how do you feel about this? Now, those are what goes into the insights. And they might say, oh, I'd like more data in this area, or I'm lukewarm. I don't think these results were that great, or this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm super excited. And hopefully they've dealt that, given that one question further, why do you feel like that? What's your driving? So we can take all of that and build it back in so that when we build that next generation messaging with that slide, we have hit those points that they were super interested in. And we can also then go back and highlight, I think the importance of this message was lost. Nobody seemed interested in this. Maybe it's a side note that we don't spend a lot of time highlighting. Maybe it's not impactful to our doctors. And you can build that better resource that puts your messaging through that's going to resonate with them and get, their interest more and more into the program.
Yeah, so it's really like a way to fine tune your narrative.
Just come from that report. Like you need to go and have that conversation where it's not clear or where you've identified something and make sure you're thinking about it the way it happened is really crucial.
We have these insights, right? So your MSL teams are bringing and gathering these insights towards you. Then they're being analyzed, and then you're utilizing this, just like we discussed, right? But at the same time, the MSLs themselves, they are the ones collecting this, and they have a really, in my experience, have a really, really strong view on how you could shape content to make it more relevant to the HCPs. What I don't see so much is them being involved, where possible, in the content development. What is your view on that?
So I'm actually greatly in favor of this as a practice. They have the best understanding of what works in the field, what doesn't, how much time they're getting, what can be easy to use and what not. I think across the board, we're all understanding that in today's world, short content with the option to go into more detail is kind of optimal in most situations for field medical. But I believe that, there are two places where they can be super helpful in content creation. One's at conception, are really identifying the detail, the amount of detail that should be in that material that they're going to use. The specific words they use in some TAs is very different. You have some, TAs that are MOA driven, very science pathophysiology, and you have some that are very, very clinical, and you need to put everything in general clinical terms, or they're not going to follow your path with you. And then they have not internalized the messages that you're trying to get. So it's just towards the functionality and content per se. I think they are a great resource for identifying that up front and being part of what that asset should look like. But then also in the second part, and I think this isn't done quite as much, but is really involving them with taking the asset at the end and helping their team understand this is why it was created. These are the messages that we're trying to do. And this is where we can use it in the breadth of all of the other information that we have. Because, you almost never just have one asset. And to every, one or two assets you're using in the field, there are probably another 3 or 4 supporting internal assets that have more and more detail. And so I think a great place for field medical to help is taking that. I think they're often called adoption ladders or belief ladders. And, sometimes that's a clinical term or commercial term, sometimes medical, but, you have an HCP that you've identified as somewhere between, I know nothing about what you're talking about, and I'm an expert at what you're talking about, and you need to constantly try to push them further. And so there are specific ways that can help have that conversation, and having the MSLs come in and be part of that process to say, oh, we can use these materials here to get them between these steps, or you might want to use these at a higher step. And I think, one, that makes for better understanding, 2, better insight collection, generation at the end, but 3, it also gets their buy-in and all of them using the resources at the end of the day. Because the last thing that you want as a MedCom person is to build something that nobody's using.
Yeah, absolutely. Or receives a lot of pushback.
MSLs are usually very eager to be involved. They love to help with this. It's just making sure, as I said, that everybody understands why the help is useful, who best to give the help, what type of time commitment. It is not, necessarily part of their job description. And so that can be sometimes where friction points, as you said, can come up.
I would like to start talking a little bit more about what has changed when it comes to how healthcare professionals consume information and consume content. So over those years, what have you seen that had really changed, and what do you feel are the hot topics right now in MedComms that we need to address?
Yeah, so this is a loaded question, and there's so many great answers to this. For me, I think, over the past several years, there's just been a boom in data, boom in publications, so much at our fingertips as a healthcare profession. And it's quite the task to kind of stay up on top of all of that, especially our HCPs who are seeing more and more patients each day. And then even in addition to that, with all this information at our fingertips, I'd also say our attention spans have also dramatically kind of decreased. So we really need to make sure we're getting the right message across right away to keep and maintain that focus of anybody that we're speaking to. So, this is why in my time here working in the MedCom space, I've seen recently the need and the growing appetite for more kind of bite-sized content, more modular content that our HCPs can digest. And from there, we could also dive deeper into the data, deeper into more specific points that might be raised.
But I think it's really important for us to start small, whether it's maybe a short animation or a video or an infographic that somebody from our field medical teams can talk through using the art of scientific storytelling, which is a science in and of itself. But from there, by having just, some high level overview, then we could get into the weeds if we need to, because I also see, I think prior, 10, 15 years ago, I think we all just had all of this content that also with very little white space, potentially in slides or in anything that we would show HCPs, and it would just be overwhelming, way too overwhelming. We would lose their focus. We wouldn't be educating them to the highest extent that we know we could. And so, we got to start small and eventually build up so that they come away with a few key points, because we're not going to get every point across to them, but as long as we hit the few key takeaways whenever we're interacting with our HCPs, we're going to make that difference for our patients ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Well, talking about digital communications, was wondering if you have any experiences that you could share with us around like applying maybe some new and innovative formats, and whether you have seen any successes or results doing that.
Absolutely. So one impactful example from my experience in simplifying digital communications within my teams recently occurred when we started adding high-level overviews and clear takeaways of publications and Congress abstracts or presentations to our reactive scientific exchange materials. So initially, our content has always contained rich scientific content with almost no white space in our content, I might add. So text heavy, no white space, and I don't think it took a rocket scientist to know that, our HCPs were finding this kind of hard to navigate, hard to understand, and take some clear-cut messages away from this. So we've also gotten feedback from HCPs that, hey, we need simpler information, but if we want to go deeper, we can with our MSLs. So what we recently started doing is adding in interactive, high-level overviews or single slide summaries for a lot of our Congress presentations, as well as our key manuscripts. And by adding in these high-level overviews, adding in interactive features that would take our HCPs to certain, graphs or figures, or to other data that might be very specific, that might not be as necessary in a high-level overview, they're able to do so. So by having this ready to go for our field teams, it allowed them to also really flex their scientific storytelling, because not all the information is going to be shown on this high-level slide. They got to really do their research. They got to have a strong understanding of this data. And by doing that, they can really have a back and forth conversation with our HCPs, because that's what I think our HCPs want. And maybe they're not getting that as much. I think they're getting more of it now. We don't want our field teams to be just reciting content from slides. We want to have that face-to-face interaction as it really should be. We want to lead with questions. We want to just provide just enough to spark this dialogue, and we'd be amazed at where the conversation could go based off of what our HCP wants to know. So by starting small here, by providing these high-level overviews to our content, we've been able to now have overwhelmingly great feedback from our field teams and even leadership that, hey, we need this. We want to see more of this. Let's keep this going as a best practice.
What do you think is the biggest misconception when it comes to implementing omni-channel strategies in medical affairs specifically?
So I think just how, from my career history today, I think omnichannel to me is a vehicle, right? It's how you do something, right? You're doing it in an omnichannel fashion, right? But then some teams actually think that omnichannel is a job title, right? Or we need to formulate an omnichannel strategy, plus a medical strategy, plus a field medical engagement strategy, plus a Congress strategy, right? Omnichannel is just a subset. I disagree. I think it's an omnichannel strategy that encompasses everything else, right? You'll have your global strategy, right, which tells you what your key priorities are based on insights we've collected to date. And then from there, you're picking up all the different channels that you have available to you as a company, right? If, for example, field medical, any insights that you can do, like social listening, and then you formulate a bigger strategy, which is your omnichannel strategy, which is encompassing all those kind of channels and thinking about what content is being produced or that you can basically repurpose. So yeah, I don't think omnichannel sometimes is being used in the right way, and I think it can be up for interpretation.
If you would need to take a shot at describing omnichannel in the most concise way possible, how would you describe that?
That's a very good question. I would probably say omnichannel is a way of doing something. You're trying to reach that right audience at the right time with the right piece of content to help problem solve their biggest problem that they're trying to solve for their patient. That probably wasn't the most concise way of saying it. I think omnichannel to me is a bit of a circle, right? You formulate a strategy based on insights that you've had previously. You go execute on that strategy, understanding what those KPIs are, what metrics you're assessing for those KPIs, and you're plugging that all back into your strategy to evolve it. So to me, an omnichannel strategy is not one and done. It's really that dynamic strategy that is never complete.
Yeah, it's like a work in progress, and you analyze and readjust your strategy to optimize for the outcome. Yeah, I like that. Now, I'm wondering how, as an organization, can you implement this properly, right? Because if you look at the traditional medical affairs setup with the different medical affairs functions, and now, with the onset of people specializing in omnichannel, like I'm wondering how that all relates to each other. So what is a good setup for that? Or maybe how's this set up at Pfizer in your case?
So I think understanding who your key audience is, right, from an internal perspective, right? Who are your key stakeholders that are going to really help you formulate this strategy? One word of advice I'd give to the listeners of this podcast is don't have it too big, right? I think, too many cooks in the kitchen, you'll never get a strategy. I think you really need to think about who is that core group of people that you're going to be really working on a day-to-day basis, right? And to me, that's really for example, the people producing the content, your medical directors, both whether it's a global medical director, is it a US one or a country level one, right? And then also, if you're thinking about data and analytics, do you need to have a data and analytics specialist as well to come help you figure out what metrics you can obtain? But the way I see it is you'll have a core group of people, whether that's 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, where you start to talk about how do you break down that overall global strategy into concise omnichannel journeys for that key audience. And then you think of an extended team, right? Who are the other people that need to know of the strategy? They may be the ones executing it. They may be the ones sharing it with other people. So I really do think it's like a core and extended team.
Transforming Medical Communications is brought to you by MedComms Experts. To find out more about MedComms Experts and how we create some of the most cutting-edge medical communications programs anywhere in the world, visit www.medcoms-experts.com. And then make sure to search for Transforming Medical Communications in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at MedComms Experts, thanks for listening.